Welcome to the Human Factors and Ergonomics Hub, a series of educational podcasts that showcase the connection between human capabilities and good work design, brought to you by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society of Australia. Hey everyone, welcome back to the HFE Hub. I'm Sharon Todd, and today I'm chatting with Roger Lewis. Now, Roger is a senior forensic engineer at Dorman Consulting with extensive expertise in forensic incident investigation, ergonomics, and human factors. He advises organisations across Australia on the design and implementation of safe systems of work, processes, and equipment use, with the aim of improving safety, comfort, and productivity through sound, human-centred design principles. So I'm excited to be chatting with Roger Lewis today about volunteering in rural areas, and with the fires recently in Victoria, there's lots of things that Roger has to share with us that we're going to talk about today. But firstly, Roger, thank you so much for joining us. It's so great to have you on the HFE Hub.
You're welcome. Thank you, Sharon.
That's okay. It's a pleasure. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey in human factors and ergonomics.
Certainly. So I have a degree in aerospace engineering from RMIT and found myself working at Ford Motor Company in the early 90s. And by the beginning of the century, I was in the vehicle package and ergonomics team, as it was called then, with the likes of the great Jody Oakman. And we were very lucky to work on vehicle lines such as Territory and Falcon and deliver some great things there. The human factors work that we did involved making sure that occupants of cars can get in and out, they can sit where it's comfortable, they can interact with the controls, things make sense, they're intuitive. And essentially, if the customer had to open the instruction manual, then we had failed. So the idea really was to make things so convenient and so easily accessible that our customers would be able to enjoy the vehicle. And if they said nothing, it was a win, because people only really complain about the ergonomics of a motor car if there's something wrong with them. They never really give good feedback. So that was really exciting. And then over time, I moved into other areas of the company, and vehicle architecture is a big thing. So it was setting up the structure of vehicle in not only how people enter and exit, where they sit, how they interact, the roominess and so forth, but all of the other systems that go into a vehicle, the powertrain, braking, luggage and cargo and that sort of thing. So it was a very fulfilling role developing all these new vehicles like Ranger, Territory and so forth. But along the side was also responsibility for health and safety of my team. And I managed to get involved in a lot of really interesting investigations into why things went wrong the way they did. So when I left Ford Motor Company in 2019, I found myself getting into the forensic engineering world, which is being able to explore the curiosity of finding out why things fail. Unfortunately, often in these cases, they involved injuries. But to look at what went wrong, why it went wrong, how it could have been prevented, how much it would cost, and that sort of thing. In parallel to all of this, I've been volunteering for much of my life, but after the Black Saturday fires in 2009, I heard Kevin Butler from BlazeAid talking to John Fain on ABC Radio, and he was talking about this volunteering group that I'd never heard of. And what they were doing was going to farms that had suffered through the fires and being useful. And by being useful, they were constructing new fences. They were providing the labour that would enable the structures to go back up on the farm, and then the farmer could bring their livestock back, and that would help them get back on their feet in terms of cash flow and getting the farm running again. I thought that sounded interesting. And I've never done any fencing before in my life. I was totally ignorant of what it involved. So I put my hand up. I went to BlazeAid at Kilmore East and I became a volunteer. And I can tell you that that experience has been some of the most fulfilling experience of my life. It is wonderful to be useful. Not only in building fences, you build a fence and you can see what you've done, but you get to meet people you would never have met otherwise. You do meet farmers who've been through the worst of times and are surviving, and it's a really incredible leveler. Whatever stresses I might have had are nothing compared to what these people have been through, and it brings a lot of humility with it. So for me personally, there have been multiple reasons why this has been a very fulfilling hobby. And along the way, I've picked up a whole lot of new skills. I've met some people, and every time I go to a BlazeAid camp, I seem to meet the same people, and we cross paths. And there's a good sense of humour in rural volunteering. It's very hard to explain, but it's on so many levels, it's a really wonderful experience. So while I was at Ford, we had this corporate volunteering program. The company, all the way up to Bill Ford in Detroit, had an altruistic streak, which was, as long as it's safe to do so, to send groups of employees out to do volunteer work. And not just in rural areas, but in and for charities all over the place, whether it be to do with sorting donations to St Vincent de Paul or helping at Food Bank. There are many opportunities, but they wanted to be satisfied that the supervisor, people like me, would send them to an area that was safe so the employee is not put at risk. When volunteering at BlazeAid and places like that, I could see that the volunteer group had a responsibility to the volunteers to keep them safe as well. And those safe systems of work have evolved a lot since 2009. So what I've been able to see is, from the point of view of an employer, how to manage the risk of sending employees to an unfamiliar worksite. And from the point of view of a volunteer and a team leader, of being able to see how the risks should be controlled on the ground.
Okay.
And that has given me a great deal of perspective on what the hazards and risks are and how they can be controlled in a way that promotes enthusiastic volunteering, but to the best of our ability means people go home as healthy as when they arrived.
Of course. So what are some of the significant hazards for volunteers working in rural settings?
There are three main types of hazard. The first one is environmental. So if you go, for example, to a fire ground, there will be perhaps injured wildlife, maybe uninjured wildlife. There'll be snakes and kangaroos and things that would like to bite us or eat us or fight with us. There are issues relating to sunlight, so heat stroke, sunburn, for example. Sometimes after floods, or if working near creeks, there's water that can be fallen into, so there's actually drowning risks. And then, of course, mosquitoes and insects, potential for disease. The second type of hazard relates to man-made objects. So it could be that there are power lines nearby, working near plant and machinery. If you're working with fencing materials, so there's sharp wire, there could be rust, so there's tetanus risk. And the last one, probably the really important one, is hazardous manual handling. Just about everything to do with fences is on a macro scale.
So is it only fences that you're doing in the volunteering work?
No, actually, there's a variety. But after a fire, for example, the old fence has to be rolled up. So there's a lot of clearing, removal of fallen trees and so forth, removal of destroyed structures, those things that can be done manually. If it's for example, is a building that's been burnt out, then that would be taken care of by professional contractors with bulldozers and the like. But for those things that can be done by humans working in a team, typically it's removal of trees and rolling up of the old fence. For construction of a new fence, the posts have to be put in, then the pickets, and then the wire has to be run out. There'll be gates to install and so forth. So there's a great deal of manual handling involved in that. And even though the heavier materials can be transported by a machine, whether it's a tractor or the back of a ute or a trailer, getting posts from horizontal in a trailer to vertical in the ground, ready for the fence to be strung up, it involves people manipulating those awkward or heavy objects. And so in those cases, things like a buddy system, working in twos, threes or fours is really important to do team lift. And there are occasions when things just can't be managed safely by a team at all, and that's where the heavier mechanical equipment is needed.
Do you call that equipment in, or is that available to you? How does that work?
Yes, so the team leader consulting with the farmer would agree on what's actually needed to do this safely. And one of the really important facets of this is the volunteers and the team leader are all empowered to say no. And it's really important. The really good, the efficient, effective teams are the ones where there's no real hierarchy. I mean, there's the team leader, but everybody has a voice. One of the great facets of working in the teams is that there's very little hierarchy. All of the volunteers are there because they want to be. And they want to be because there's a common purpose. And so it makes it a lot easier to have frank conversation about what will and won't be done. For example, if we get to a farm and there are multiple contractors at the farm, they might be doing power line repairs or repairing a dam or working somewhere else, we will make a decision that we won't work within 50 or 100 metres of the other contractors, particularly if there's electrical work. And that's okay, because there will be plenty of work to do elsewhere on the farm. We don't need to get too close to the plant. When it comes to constructing fences, quite often there'll be a tractor with an auger and a pile driver on the back that is driving the posts into the ground. So in that case, the team does need to work closely with the farmer or with the fencing contractor who's putting those posts in, but we have to manage the risk of working near mobile plant. And so that's not just distance, but it's time as well, so that they might work 50 metres ahead of the volunteers. Or under very close supervision, volunteers may assist with the tractor, but in phases. So you position the post, you stand well back, very good communication with the tractor operator, and all of the principles of pedestrian and plant safety that we might apply in a warehouse or in a factory or at a truck unloading zone, we apply those to the fence line as well.
You've actually bounced to something that I wanted to ask you, and that was really, there's a lot of systems that you need to put in place, and that's what you started to talk about. So, because it's about obviously risk assessment and control. So, yeah, just let's talk more about those systems that you're putting in place for the safety of everybody.
When I first started volunteering, there weren't any systems really. You would turn up, you'd be sent out, you might come home at the end of the day. Over the years, safe systems of work have evolved, and they start with information, training, instruction and supervision. By that, what I mean is that, for example, with Blaze Aid, when a volunteer notifies Blaze Aid they'd like to come and assist, they have to let the camp know that they're coming. And that's done through Blaze Aid's website and email system. Then when they arrive, they go through an induction which is really important. And it includes reading safe work method statements and having them explained to you. Actually, there will usually be copies of those on posters with examples up on the walls, so that the volunteer is quite thoroughly inducted in what it involves and what the rules are. And when it comes to things like chainsaw operation, you're not permitted to operate a chainsaw unless you have a certificate. So they want to see evidence of prior experience with those tools. For the most part, volunteers come from diverse areas all over the world, cities, you name it, they've come from there, may not have any experience of fencing at all. And that's okay, because the induction exposes them to some of that. There is a lot more exposure on the fireground. And people are, well, certainly in my case, were able to develop their skills by observing others and to go at pace they were comfortable with. And the beauty of fencing is that you don't have to use the hazardous tools. You don't have to do hazardous manual handling. You can get involved by getting the tools and materials to where they're needed, by walking the fence line, by handling communications. And so it doesn't have to be high intensity work from the outset. The next step after the induction is that every morning there is a safety briefing, and it's mandatory. And the safety briefing will cover aspects of tool safety or equipment safety, or a process or some aspect of fencing. The safety briefing then covers which teams are going to which properties that day, and what to take with you, what to expect. And the team leader, who will have a crew of 4 or 5 people allocated to them, will also have additional information provided on the nature of the property, the type of work that's needed, any other factors that may be relevant. For example, the terrain at the property. Sometimes a farmer can be difficult to deal with, so whether there are any nuances that need to be taken into account. And the team leader often has additional training in what to look for in terms of how well the farmer is coping. And that's important because not only are fence structures being put up, but there's a welfare matter as well. And so often the farmer is reluctant to talk about their experience, but how well they're coping can be seen. And so the role of the team leader is not just for the safety of the team, but also the welfare of the farmer.
That's so important, really, that psychosocial aspect of the work.
It's really important because what we see is the fences, but what underlies that is there may be months and months between the fire and the fences going in. The first day of Blaze 8 volunteering I did, it was 8 months between the fires and the first structure going back up on that property. And it had been a long journey for the owners of that land. It was a very emotional day. The welfare of farmers is critical, and it's not really well recognised or well known. This type of volunteering, this being useful on the property after a disaster, is not just about physical reconstruction. And it's one of the privileges of doing this stuff, and why it's so fulfilling, is because not so much about helping, it's about being useful. And by being useful enables the farmer to get back on their feet.
Can I ask a simple question? Volunteering obviously means people aren't being paid. In terms of the fences and things, is this sort of part of their insurance? Who pays for their fences, I suppose, is the very simple question.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. Luck Saturday showed that there was little or no insurance of farms in regional Victoria. It may have changed a little bit, but I haven't encountered yet anybody who's been adequately insured. The insurance may cover the cost of materials, but it won't cover the cost of the fence. And that's where that gap is filled with volunteers. So the reasonably well insured farmers still need help, or still need a volunteer group. The underinsured farmers, there's subtle ways that material can be provided or donated, or it just turns up, and so stuff gets done, even if they weren't expecting it or couldn't afford it. Things get done, and that's another really satisfying thing. Fence wire, for example, 1,500 metre spool of high tensile wire. You would probably need at least one, maybe two of those rolls per fence, 400 metre fence. They're $300 each. And then you have the posts, which are $20 each. You might need 60 of those, and then you'll need holiday pickets and then mesh. So even a moderately sized fence could be $800 or $900 just in materials. The labour required to install all of that would be 2 to 3 times that. And so the value of the volunteers is it's massive. It's the difference between rebuilding and not.
Do the farmers have some say in where you're putting the fencing? I mean, obviously they want it in particular places. So how much autonomy do they have?
The farmer and the Blaze Aid camp coordinator would typically talk to each other, and the farmers at what sort of animals they have on their property, whether it's sheep or cattle. There might be deer that come in from the neighbouring park that have to be controlled.
They don't need a fence. They just jump over it.
Well, I've seen some deer fences that have been 2.5 metres high.
Oh, yes, of course.
And then they might have other feral animals to worry about. So the type of fence that's needed, that's the farmer's call. Where the farmer needs the fence, usually it's boundary fence that we start with so they can get on their feet again. But where the fence needs to go, where the gates should be, and so on, it's likely to be where the old fence was, but not necessarily. All of that is worked out between the farmer and Blaze Aid, and that's a really important part of risk management, because Blaze Aid needs to know that the team that is being sent out is going to be doing a predefined task so that they can have assessed the risks associated with that before the team is sent.
And I imagine that there's going to be some site-specific things that crop up that's emergent risks. How do you manage some of those?
Every farm is different. Every site is different. They're different because the type of fire that's gone through may be different. So if you look at very hot fire that's burned out a tree, the tree roots have probably gone as well, but you don't see that by looking at the ground. So there's trip hazards and things. If it's been a very hot fire, there may be types of trees that are prone to shedding limbs. So there'll be risks associated with things falling. So every farm needs, and every fence, every area within a fence needs its own risk assessment, and it's not something you do at the beginning. It's something you do continuously throughout the whole event, because discoveries are made. And it could be that there's so many trip hazards developing that we need to stop work and have a grader or a bulldozer go through before we can start again. Or it could be that the weather that day is turning for the worse, and there's a potential for flooding. The control of risk is ongoing, and it has to be. So my practice is I would go to a farmer, put the drone up, and I'd run it along the fence line. Maybe a crew has been there in the previous days. I want to see what's been done. And then I can work out what materials have to be carried to the far end of the fence. Talking to the farmer, understanding what the challenges have been. Dealing with the new crew is another one, so they might have different skills. So I want to know what we're capable of before promising what we will deliver. Those things are necessarily very specific to the day and to the place and to the task.
Sorry, you sort that out. Obviously, that's first. You said you put your drone up, and then you would probably.
So before leaving the base camp, I would want to know what we're going to do and where, and as much as possible about the place. And I will have spoken to the farmer to make sure they know we're coming and so on. When I get there, if there has been, I want to see what we're doing. And so a good way to do that is with the drone. If there's been previous work that may not be completed, I want to see that. And the drone is another good way to do that, because we could be talking about a kilometre of fence line. I could walk it and walk back again. But if I'm lazy, I'll just put the drone up and go and fly it.
Drone's a much better idea, I think.
Well, it is quite good, because then you can get a clearer view of other hazards and maybe unexpected things. Or, there's a creek there we weren't aware of, and so on. The information gathered before we start is really important. And then as we're going through, there may be some other things that arise, and that brings to mind the equipment trailers that Blazade has. And I talk about Blazade a lot. It's not the only volunteering group. It's the one that I've had the most experience with. They have standardised trailers, and the trailers have all the same equipment in them in the same place. But what they also have is a really good first aid kit, and every trailer has a defibrillator. And that was the result of a really generous drive a couple of years ago that resulted in all 200 and something trailers being equipped with a defib. And it's great, because a lot of the volunteers are people like me, or maybe a little older, who are good candidates for a defibrillator.
Hopefully we'll never have to use that, Roger. But yes, there'll be people who might.
Hopefully not. But it shows that there's been really good thought given to what can go wrong. You're in a remote area. You might not, if there isn't a defibrillator when you need one, you're going to use up the golden hour really quickly. And it's physically demanding. If we can afford it, why not?
Yeah, it's physically demanding work. Yeah.
So that's one of the probably under-documented features of this stuff is there's been a lot of good thought put into preserving volunteer life. One of the interesting things has been the world of corporate volunteering. In the mid-2010s, it became common for larger businesses to send groups of volunteers, groups of employees to do volunteering work. And I talked about this a bit earlier with Ford, but I became aware that some businesses had the 2 days a year of volunteering as a mandatory requirement, a KPI, and it was assessed at their end-of-year performance review. And so people were under pressure to go and do some volunteering. And it became apparent that corporate volunteers were turning up when they really didn't want to be there. They had to be there. So they were volunteering, but they weren't really volunteers. And they can be very difficult to manage during the day because as a team leader, because what you need is a team that's focused on safely delivering the goal. What is really difficult is distraction and phone use and disinterest, and the potential for the lack of focus to lead to carelessness. And I use that word very carefully because subjectively I've seen behaviours amongst those who don't want to be there that are more hazardous than behaviours amongst those who do. So as a corporate person, I would want to make sure that the people I send to do the volunteering actually want to do that. And not that they've just ticked a box to go and do this one here because that's the only way to get off their naughty list. But if they've got a range of places that they can visit to do their volunteering, then they should be empowered to pick the one that suits their skills or their interests. So they will actually enjoy the day. So a volunteer who isn't a true volunteer isn't much use.
How are they screened? Just quickly, how are they screened as, to be a volunteer? For instance, if I was volunteering, I might not want to do fencing, but I might be great at cooking for the volunteers so that there's food or something. But tell me about that.
There are two parts to the answer. So the first one is that we were lucky at Ford that the management team had an interest in making this work. It wasn't about ticking boxes. It was about being useful. And so we would recognise that people had different abilities, different interests, and so we had a range of charities that we were assisting, specifically with the BlazeAid type organisations. So BlazeAid has and will have more base camps, and each of those base camps will have an office area that needs to be administered, where the farmers and the camp coordinator talk to each other about what's needed on each property. They'll effectively have an HR activity because they need to manage people coming and going, and they'll have to they'll have a kitchen, and the kitchen will be preparing breakfast and dinner for maybe 50 volunteers every day, maybe more than that. And having the makings of lunch set out so people can make up their sandwiches in the morning. So a very effective kitchen. There'll be all sorts of administrative things that need to be done around the camp itself. So you don't actually have to be out there building fences to be an effective volunteer. And the type of activity that is being done doesn't have to be overtly physical. It can be quite challenging, and it's all important, but it doesn't have to expose you to the hard labour of being out on the fence line.
So are these mobile offices? In my experience in bushfires, obviously there's a lot of stuff that's mobilised to an area. So is that what BlazeAid does as well?
So typically they would find out, let's say a fire is in a particular area, they would find out from the local councils and Lions Club and Apex, do you have a sports ground or a camping ground or a showgrounds that could be used that's big enough for a muster room, an office, a kitchen, or has a kitchen, has shower facilities and has room for 20 or 30 caravans. So they need space. Base camp can run for some months. So it turns into a long-term operation, and that can be challenging when it's a sports club and they'll have their nothing much happening during summer season, but in winter they'll have their football teams running. And so it has to be with the cooperation of the community. That's very rarely a problem because the camp is there for the community.
Let's come back to feet on the ground doing the fencing. We've obviously established some of the hazards and just this, emerging hazard problem that occurs on these sites. What are some of the controls that you can implement or that you do implement for the safety of volunteers working on these sites?
So the first is information and supervision. So we make sure that people don't try to attempt a task that they're not comfortable doing. And given that fencing involves hand tools, using high tensile wire, which is springy, you can have eye injuries, and you need to wear gloves. There's a lot of PPE involved, and although it's the lowest form of risk control, it's the easiest one to police with volunteers. The use of power tools is very carefully regulated, so that as a supervisor, I want to make sure that the person is capable of using the tool safely, and I would do that by going around the training loop with them. So demonstrate, discuss, observe, discuss, demonstrate, and keep going until this task can be done by that person with this tool safely and competently, and that they can demonstrate that repeatedly to me. So there's a lot of time invested in making sure that those tasks are done by that individual in a safe way. When it comes to plant and machinery, we have that extra level of risk management. So everybody keeps well clear of tractors, for example, at least 3 metres, better have 5 if we can. And the only people who work near such machinery are those who have been trained in doing so. And there'll be a spotter, and we have extra observation to make sure that's done safely. When it comes down to developing hazards, whether it be weather or something we've discovered, we've found a lot of snakes, for example, then we're quite entitled to stop, and we won't proceed in an area if the hazards can't be eliminated or risks controlled.
And the snakes moved on.
And the snakes moved on. Most snakes are friendly when they're kept at a distance and they're not disturbed. So we just recognise that they're living their life and should be allowed to do that. The important thing is if we can't adequately control the risks that we assess, then we won't attempt the task.
So that's a nice segue into maybe some of the big challenges that come in this work. So talk to me about what are some of the biggest challenges for you working with volunteers in this area?
There are 2 real challenges. The first one is, I discussed earlier, the volunteers who really don't want to be there. They can be difficult because they're not focused and aligned, and it's very difficult to encourage them. Sometimes they can be encouraged, but not always. The other one, it's interesting, there are a lot of volunteers who are super keen. We have to temper the keenness. And one example there is after the Black Saturday fires, I was working on a farm near Kinglake, and another volunteer and I were putting in gate posts. And this fellow was in his 70s and a crusty old farmer himself, and he was just using hand tools, and I had the auger, and I was thinking, oh, yeah. And I didn't say anything, but I decided I was going to beat him. So I drilled the hole and I put the post in, and I was ramming it, and I was going as fast as I could, and it just wore me out. And so I had to have a rest. And when I looked over, he had finished his gate post and he'd moved on to the next one. And I was exhausted. Along the way, he had just a methodical way of ramming the soil. He didn't overexert himself. He didn't develop any MSDs. He was happy. He was just enjoying being out in the mild weather. Whereas I was racing, I'd struck myself in the knee with the post hole digger. I was sweating like you wouldn't believe. I needed extra water. I was ready for a lie down, and
that was only just one post.
And that was one post. And what was the point of doing it? Well, I think it was pretty selfish of me, but the lesson was the tortoise does win, and the hare doesn't. But not only that, but the tortoise will go on to live to 100, and the hare will probably not. So for me, the lesson was be methodical and calm about it. His health outcomes were better than mine. I probably exposed myself to unnecessary risks by rushing, and it didn't get me anywhere anyway. So that's the thing. When you have people who are keen and fresh, they just want to get in there and do stuff, holding them back a little bit, not to dampen the enthusiasm, but just say, well, hang on, before we jump in, let's have a look in it. Make sure you're aware there's a overhanging branch, and let's deal with that. And you're aware that this machinery can be difficult to work with, and this is really heavy, so don't go too hard, or get some help with it, etc., etc. Those little pieces of advice temper or somehow control the keenness without dampening the enthusiasm.
And I
That's really
imagine
important.
that there's also participation with your farmer who's got local knowledge about what the soil is like or what the soil isn't like. And I imagine that you harness some of that information as well, do you?
It's very important to listen to the farmer. It's very important to understand what the farmer's challenges have been. And that's not a way of saying you ask them all about their experience. If they want to talk about it, they will. Quite often they've been very badly affected psychologically. And if they're in no mood to discuss it, then that's okay. But on the other hand, sometimes they do and they get some recovery by talking about it. And so if the farmer will tell you a little bit of detail about what they experienced, then that can be really beneficial. I know it's helped me a lot to regain humility by understanding what they went through. But in terms of the farmer may well understand what's just under the surface and how hard it is. And this is why we had concrete posts here, and you'll never get through that stuff. And sometimes it's just taken as a challenge. Other times they're really particular about what they want. And what they want is what we will deliver to the best of our ability, because it's their place, it's their home, and it's their livelihood that we're trying to restore.
So I imagine that there are lots of satisfactions in this kind of work. So what are some of the greatest satisfactions of being a volunteer working in this space?
It's physical and psychological. The physical work, so you get worn out building stuff, and then you get to the end of the day and you look at what's been built and say, hey, we built that. And so there's the satisfaction of being useful, but of getting stuff done. And it's tremendous. Being out in the open air is always good for the health as well. The teams of volunteers come from all over the world. There are different demographics. There are people like me from the city. There are people from farms, from interstate, overseas. A lot of backpackers do this sort of thing. So you get to meet people you would never have met otherwise. And they have stories and they have interests and they have other things. And then you get to appreciate diversity quite a lot. And I think that's one of the great things about this is you never know from one day to another who you're going to meet, who you're going to work with. There have been some absolute masters that I've been lucky enough to encounter over the years, people who have tremendous skills and are happy to share them. And so every day on fence line is learning, is a learning experience. And some of the techniques and tricks and traps, things to avoid over the years have been suggested or hinted at. Quite often the best teachers are those who will let us make mistakes and then show us how to do it properly. But they do it with humour, and there have been some grumpy ones as well. But overall, I've found it to be really inspiring, and I can't speak highly enough of how satisfying this has been for me over the last 17 years to be able to do this stuff. My message is that this sort of work, when you look at why people volunteer, they'll say it's to help others. When you boil it all down, it's satisfying because it feels good. And what we really need to encourage is for people to get that feel-good satisfaction from volunteering, but not to get hurt in the process, because you can't have enduring satisfaction as a volunteer if you can't volunteer. And so that blending of risk management with being useful isn't that hard. It takes a bit of thought and a bit of planning and really good awareness by each volunteer of what can go wrong and how to avoid it. And it takes really good supervision and management by those who are supervising the teams, supervising the camps, or sending the volunteers. But if you get all that together, we can encourage enthusiastic volunteering in such a way that people come home healthy at the end of the day.
Thanks for joining us at the Human Factors and Ergonomics Hub, brought to you by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society of Australia, where human-centred design really matters. If you like this podcast, make us your favourite in your podcast app. We look forward to chatting with you next time.